Most of these photographs, you can see the old ones, are from the archive that's owned by the Historical Trust. And it goes back to the first real doctor in Wetherby. It was a Dr. Hargreaves, who had a daughter who married a Dr. Lodge, who became the next doctor in Wetherby. And then their son was Jim Lodge, which I'm sure many of you were treated by him. The photographs were all taken by Dr. Lodge and left in the family house, which 3 generations lived in, so nothing got thrown away. And Jim Lodge gave us these, and we digitised them, and that's what you're going to see today. Now, it's 200th anniversary of Wetherby being sold. Interestingly enough, it's also the 200th anniversary of the RNLI this year, and it's also the 200th anniversary of the RSPCA. So we're in good company. But you came to hear about the Great Sale of Wetherby from 1824. Why? Why was it sold? How did you get to this point? Let's have a look at the history, first of all. The first village around here was a Celtic village which was just south of Wetherby, and it went from Grange Park right up onto the hill above Colwyn, what we now know as Compton. That was the first one. We know this, all the archaeology has been done recently. Then came the Romans, and they went up to where part of the Celtic village was, at the top of the hill, and they built Dalton Parler's villa, a very large, very important villa. And this is a map of the roads around this area in Roman times. And you can see all very straight, apart from one which goes from Tadcaster in a curve past Dalton Parler's. The only reason that they can do this is because it must have been a very important villa. And then they used the shallows at what we know as Wetherby as the crossing. The Vikings had a look. Apparently there is some Viking evidence on Grange Park. But of course they were at Jorvik, which we now know as York, where they found all these extra pieces of archaeology. But the first real owner of Wetherby Manor was Wigbert, the Anglo-Saxon. Now, that's approximately what it would look like, but we don't know. And that was almost certainly a sheep farm. After that, after the Norman Conquest, 1066 and all that, if you remember your history, he came and was given the area, the Percy family, who built Spofford Castle and built Wetherby Keep. Now, Spofford Castle isn't really a castle, it's a fortified manor house. And the keep was built to protect the southern aspect and also the ford crossing at Wetherby. Unfortunately, the keep had been built by the Percys without asking the permission of the king. But apparently in those days, to have a castle you had to get the permission of the king. Who fell out with the Percys and ordered it to be demolished. So it's only lasted for 15 years. It's now the footings. The stone has almost certainly been used in lots of the buildings around Wetherby, because in those days, you know, a piece of cut stone, very valuable. It took a long time. It was all cut by hand. But the footings are still there in a private garden, 57 foot square. In 1238, it was granted to an order of military monks, the Knights Templar, who I'm sure you've heard of, who petitioned Henry III by then to grant Wetherby a market charter. And this is the market charter which is kept in the the national records down in London. And you query the name Wetherby, if you look there, there it is. It was then given to the Knights of St John, the Knights Hospitallers, and then after that, after the Reformation, it was given back to the Percys. Thomas Percy, 7th Earl of Northumberland, he lived on Alnwick Castle now, and it is rumoured that he still owns Spofford Castle. Unfortunately, he was a very strong Catholic, and he was part of the rising of the Catholic Northern Earls, and he wanted Mary Queen of Scots to be on the throne in England instead of Queen Elizabeth I, who was a Protestant. So he was part of the Northern Earls rebellion. With their armies, they came down from Northumberland, and they got as far as Bramham Moor, where they were roundly beaten, and he fled north, and he fled up to Scotland. If you remember Blackadder, poor old Sir Percy, it was always Sir Percy that was getting in the neck. Well, he did again, because he fled north, and he was captured by James Douglas, the 4th Earl of Morton, who imprisoned him, and imprisoned him for 3 years. He eventually then was sold back to the Crown for £2,000. He was brought back down to York, to the Knaves Bar, and had his head chopped off. They paid £2,000 for just to chop his head off, so it must have been worth it. Now it gets interesting. In 1602, Wetherby was granted as one of the manors by Elizabeth I to the Countess of Shrewsbury, who had kept Mary Queen of Scots imprisoned, and all her large entourage. The interesting thing is, one of the places she was imprisoned was in Wensleydale, Castle Bolton, and then she was moved from Castle Bolton down to Pontefract through Wetherby, and apparently the entourage stopped in Wetherby for refreshments before over the bridge and down to Pontefract. The Countess of Shrewsbury, best known as Bess of Hardwick, had four husbands, but she only had her children to her second husband, William Cavendish. You're starting to get the name there, I'm sure you. She gave the manor to her son also, and they're all William Cavendish. The whole lot for hundreds of years, their first name was William. She gave it to William Cavendish, who became the first Earl of Devonshire. The Devonshire's now owned Wetherby at that point. If we continue down the line until we come to the 4th Earl of Devonshire, he was made the first Duke of Devonshire in 1694. And so on again until we come to the 5th Duke, who married Georgiana Spencer, who was an ancestor of Lady Di, actually. On her 17th birthday, he married her. And their third child and their only son was born in Paris on the 21st of May, 1790, producing William Spencer Cavendish, who became the 6th Duke, also known as the Bachelor Duke. He was the one who sold Wetherby. Why did he sell Wetherby? Well, he built quite a large extension on Chatsworth House at that time, but it was also his gambling debts. He had large gambling debts in London, and he had to pay those off. Whatever the reason, the Great Sale of Wetherby was scheduled to start on the 11th of October, 1824. So it would actually be on 200 years ago. It would be on the second day of the sale. You might ask, what have the Dukes of Devonshire ever done for Wetherby? Well, they built the Devonshire Arms. That was just to get more money in, really. It was not a post house. It didn't have any horses to replenish the post coaches or anything like that. But it had just been built, actually, not long before the sale. They built New Street. New Street, you know, as Victoria Street, and it was renamed for Queen Victoria's Jubilee. And they also built the shambles. Now the shambles weren't nice little shops like they are now. There were just 10 open shops that were slaughterhouses and butchers. They were true shambles. Before the sale, the 32-page booklet had to be made out, and in full specifications in 3 parts. You've got the town of Wetherby, you've got all the surrounding lands, and you've got a nefarious thing, really, the manor. The manor was very little actual structure, but we'll come to that because that was the very last lot in the sale. The booklet was produced with very high detail. Each article within it, each field almost, was numbered. Who was living there? What it was described as, and as you look down, you'll probably find most of them say Westfield. I don't know why they actually put the name there. What it was being used for, and what area it was. And the areas were measured in acres, rods, and poles. The estate had to be advertised, and as you see here, it was advertised at the Sun and the Swan in Wetherby, the York Tavern and the George in York, the King's Arms and the Hotel in Leeds, the Granby at Harrogate, as it was spelt in those days, the Angel in Ferrybridge, and for some strange reason, the Longsborough out here at Market Wheaton. It was also noted down in London at the Auction Mart, and also at the premises of the people, the land agents who were actually doing the sales for the Duke. There's a lot of lovely talk in this booklet. The magnificence of the town is much consulted by its approaches and thoroughfares. And they go on like this, and at this point it also says that there's quite a few, obviously, rickety buildings that are going to get pulled down and opened up so that it's a nicer south aspect as you come into the town. Those will all be taken down and to make the markets larger. And it tells you here that there's going to be the widening of the road. The site, SCITE, therefore will not be included in the sale. So it just says they may be there now if you look around, but you can't buy them. All the properties, once the sale's been over, have to be emptied by Lady Day. And they put in this, what the rents are coming in at the moment. And the houses in the town is £1,500, which by modern is now 138,400. That's the equivalent today. And the land, £1,900, which is 175,300 £, which is a lot of money really in those days. And Lady Day, in case you want to know, is the Feast of the Annunciation, which is the 25th of March. So it gives them about 6 months to empty the town, or empty the properties if they haven't actually bought them. And of course, Lady Day, I think in the law societies, it's still used. It's one of the quarter days in the English calendar. Servants were hired, school terms started, and of course rents were due on the quarter days. The whole area was going to be improved. At the time, the Leeds to Wetherby Road had been made up as a turnpike road, and it saved 4 miles between Leeds and Wetherby. Presumably they went on the track of what is now the A64. It was also going to be continued on from Wetherby to York. So it's going to be very much upgraded. We'll come to that in a minute. It tells you how far it is from surrounding towns, and the beautiful river wharf is the edge of the boundary of the estate for a distance of about 1.5 miles. And it also states that on the river there are 2 extensive corn mills belonging to the estate and are up for sale. The bridge was also due for widening. Ferry Bridge seems to be very important in those days. I presume it's on the main road from London to Scotland, but it's one of the main crossing points, so that I presume is why it's so important. The bridge is going to be widened, but it already had been widened. It had been widened upstream in 1773 because the coal lorries from Garforth went across the bridge up through Harrogate to Nidderdale and Swaledale to the lead mines to smelt the lead. And when it was only 11 foot wide, they kept breaking the sides of the bridge. So that was widened in 1773, but it retained the humpback shape that you can see there. If you look, this is Michael Kay who installed the searchlights, and they made this piece here. I don't think you'd be allowed by health and safety now. But if you look at the stonework, you can see the original shape of the bridge going right down, which he did at each end. When it was widened 2 years after the big sale, it was flattened, and it was, if you walk under here, you'll see the original bridge and the 2 widenings. But it was widened, it was also flattened, and it had to be filled in at each end to get it flat. And to hold the sides up, they had to build this large buttress here, which was very useful about 100 years later, because the town hall memorial was put on it. It wasn't designed to be there. They were looking, when they looking for a place to put the memorial, it was going to be either in front of this building or in the marketplace. But someone had the bright idea of putting it on there. They added 3 lines of stone and then noted it's on there, which is a very, very good place to have it, I think. The sale was going to be held in the old town hall, which was just off the corner of this building. The first 2 days sold the town, and the second 2 days the surrounding land, with 170 lots all told. Lot 1 was the Swan Talbot, obviously owned by the Dukes of Devonshire. And it's interesting that over the road from it, there was a large garden which was actually included in it. And in that garden, in this corner, was the court building, because in those days it wasn't a universal court. Each town had its own court. And magistrates, of course. That was the first lot that was sold, and it was sold for 1,510 guineas. It was also a posting house, and it had reputedly 200 to 300 horses in readiness to change the coach horses. Wetherby was actually a pivotal point, because not only was it the main road from London to Glasgow, I'll come back to that in a minute, not only was that, but it, apparently Hull to Liverpool came through Wetherby as well, presumably via Rockley and the gap in the Pennines that way. What was I going to tell you? Lot 7 down the road was the Angel. Of course, they always had the Swan Talbot and the Angel were both the two most important post houses in Wetherby. And interestingly, there was like a square outside the Angel. And to go north, you had to turn right, then turn left. And it was only 11 foot wide. It was the narrowest point between London and Scotland on the main road. Oh, no, what I was going to tell you. The reason why the road went London to Glasgow, not London to Edinburgh. Edinburgh was still the capital of Scotland. But think, people going across to America by boat, the boats all left from the west coast. They didn't leave from the east coast of Scotland. They had to go right round the Pentland Firth, which was a dreadful area. So the main road is always said to be from London to Glasgow. Anyway, the Angel was sold for a little bit more because it had a few more horses in readiness. So that was 1,920 guineas. Just down the street was as you know, the Devonshire Inn. That was sold for 2,100 because it had just been built. It was a new building. On the corner of New Street, you would know it's this Touchwood. It was a dwelling house, quite a large one actually. And that was sold for 320 guineas. Then we come to the second day of the sale. Now we haven't sold New Street, but we'll come to that. Why we haven't sold New Street? The first lot was the Crown, and the Crown went right through from North Street right through to the marketplace, with an entrance off the marketplace and large amount of stables there. You probably remember, or some of you will remember, Albert Ward's paper shop, and the entrance just to the right, big double gates, quite a large area behind that. That was sold for just over 1,000 guineas. I'll come back to New Street now. It was strange why it wasn't sold after the one on the corner of what we know as Touchwood and the Devonshire Hotel. But it was the very last lot that was sold in the town. And they were sold for either in singles, some were single houses, some were double houses, and the average price was 180 guineas for each one. And they ended the 7 day sale. But we're back to the rest of the 7 day sale. The first one we're looking at is Bishopsgate. Now, Bishopsgate was this large building here. It was a slum, basically. This is it, at the back. It was pulled down in the late 1920s as it was uninhabitable, and it was never built, never rebuilt. But of course, Wetherby and Bloom took it over, the area, fairly recently, comparatively, and it's now the very lovely Bridgefoot Gardens, which we all see as we're coming into Wetherby. That tenement building was sold for 470 guineas. Lot 54, the most expensive lot in the town, was the watermills, the corn mills. And everybody thinks there was just one. There wasn't. There was in fact 2 corn mills. And then in this very early airborne picture, we can see that there was one along straight on and one at 90 degrees, with the watermill just there. The watermill, the mill which we now know of, is still there at that end. But of course all this was filled in. That was the picture of from the catalogue. And just to prove that there was another watermill, if you look under there, you can see the mill wheel coming out this way. This was painted by Thomas Gerton, who was a friend of Turner's, who painted 3 or 4 pictures around Wetherby. What became Wetherby's first industrial estate. It was the corn mill, which we've just been talking about. There was a sawmill and a woodyard behind, and of course the brewery behind that. Now the corn mill was only stopped producing corn in the mid-1930s, and then the building was used for all sorts of things. One of which was a firelighter factory. And as you can see, the firelighters were extremely good. That left a derelict building which was pulled down in the very early 1950s. And that produced the Old Mill Dance Hall, which, speaking to many of the older people in Wetherby, a lot of people met there. There were a lot of marriages caused by the Old Mill Ballroom. And then, of course, later the bus station was built behind. But this house here, which was the corn mill owner's house, was still there at that time, as was this building, which was part of the sawmill. And of course, in modern times, you've got the corn mill apartments. And that was all filled in. Of course, you think the river just comes down here now. There was a large lake behind there. When they were digging down for the apartments, they found that, which was the main drive wheel, which of course, all of you know, was taken away, sandblasted, painted and mounted. And I think it is a lovely view it gives of the wheel. How much did Lot 54 make? It's the most expensive in the town. 8,100. Remember, this was 200 years ago. Lot 55 was interesting as well. It was the brewery. The brewery had been built by Gregory Rhodes, and Lot 55 was the ground rent, which was up his head. Quintin Rhodes, which is the gentleman that's on the wall over there, was his son. He became a solicitor. Around about this time, Wetherby Church was being built, because of course Wetherby was in the parish of Spofford. The church was being built, and various other things, and Quintin Rhodes paid for the bells. So the bells you heard yesterday, if you heard the peal, was actually paid for by Quintin. He gave a lot of money. In fact, he collected the money to pay for the building of this building. That was inside the brewery. That was one of the original bottles. And they're nipped in here, and there's a little bulge there, which traps a glass, like a glass marble. A rubber seal was around the top. They were filled with beer, which gaseous, turned upside down. The marble dropped down and was held in place by the gas. So when you want to drink a beer, you just put your finger in the top and push the glass ball out to the way. These are all the workers in, I think even the very youngest ones, all were wearing a cap. Everyone was wearing a cap. Every time I show this picture, I find it amusing in that this chap at the end here is about 3 times the size of anybody else. And in front of me, you've got these 2 barrels, and just imagine walking in with one under each arm. That's the people who worked in the brewery. That was the ground rent, which was £26, 10 shillings a year. That was sold for 860 guineas. That's just the ground rent, not the building, of course, because Gregory Rhodes had already built that. What was described in the booklet is 4 good building plots just round the corner, which are these here. The sites where the Castle Garth house is, the Castle Keep Apartments, and the tennis club and courts. The top one was sold for 550 guineas. It had a building on it, and it was a very desirable site for building. The next one, because it had a very large area, it was cut in half, and that was made so there was no buildings on it, but it was a nice site for building. And the purchaser had to put a fence in between the two. And that was sold for 450 guineas. Then there was one just slightly further down for 460 guineas, because that had a dwelling house on it already. And down at the bottom, what we now know as the tennis courts, sold for 410. Looking in the marketplace in Westgate, this area here, this area is all going to be disappear within less than 10 years. What it was old materials. It was tenements, it was derelict cottages, it was shambles, and the purchaser basically just got what it was, i.e. the stone, the wood, and the whole area had to be cleared straight away. And that sold for 90 guineas. That's just the stone and the wood. Other marketplace in Westgate lots which are quite interesting is this one here. It's the post office, the first post office, and surprisingly, to date, there's been 9 post offices. That was sold for 630 guineas, but let's just look at the other ones. Next to what is now Specsavers was the post office. This was just before the Boer War. This was the artillery company who were billeted in Wetherby. And that was the second one. Then we have the purpose-built one, and this grand thing at the top. The whole of the top floor was for the telegraph. Those weren't telephones. It was a telegraph office, and it just amplified the signal coming from the West Riding and going up to the North East. I presume it was amplified again before it got up to Newcastle. But that was the purpose-built post office, built in 1910. Unfortunately, it was pulled down in the mid-70s. And in the same where it was pulled down, they built 2 shops, one of which was taken over by the post office. So that was another post office. That didn't last long either. Because then it went into what was the co-op. This was what we now know as Morrison's, and this area wasn't covered over at all. But that was the post office in the co-op. When Morrison's bought it, they didn't want to keep the post office, so it had to move again. This time back to where it had been 100 years before, in the back of it had been next door, at the back of the shop next door. Then from there, it went to where we know it now. Now, those of you who have been counting will say, well, that's only 7. But in amongst the changes, twice it was in Crossley Street car park as a temporary building. So 9 post offices. Other marketplace and Westgate lots that are interesting to look at, the 3 legs. Now then, you'd think the 3 legs would have been over the other side of the marketplace, but no, we found out that, as it says down there, the name of a public house was the property of the landlord, and the landlord, if he sold up and went to another building, the name of the pub went with him. And if you're wondering the difference, an inn had to provide food and accommodation, a tavern had to provide a midday meal, and a public house was literally just a place to go and have a drink. It was, as the name suggests, a public house. with a number of instances of this happening around the town. That was sold for 360 guineas. One that we can't miss in passing through the marketplace was the good old Black Bull, the very oldest pub in Wetherby, and first licensed about 1600. If you look here, a lot of them had soldiers' rooms and chambers. I think this was where the soldiers were billeted, and basically it was just a room where they lay down in the corner and went to sleep. But that was the Black Bull, and it was near the, it says here somewhere, near the chapel, which of course was just out in the, well, what we now know as the front of this building. And that was sold for 560 guineas. Going further out to, this is what we now know as the Jubilee Gardens. And interesting is that little square there, which appears on in the sale documents as a convenient bath, which of course it was a Georgian bathhouse. It was for gentlemen. It was a plunge pool below. You can go around it. Sometimes it's open. On the walk today, I think it's going to be open if you walk around. But it's a plunge pool below. But by the mid-90s, it had got very sadly sought into. It hadn't been used very much. Although Jim Lodge once told me that as a young lad with some of his friends on a very hot summer's day, they decided that they'd plunge into it because it's clean water, it's spring water that runs it. There's water continually going in and then out and into the river. But Jim told me that they jumped into it and didn't realise how cold it was. And they jumped straight out. And Jim Lodge was in the Navy during the last war, so he knew what cold water was. But of course, it was taken over. There was a number of people did it. There was Jim Lodge was one of the instigators. David Hudson, so you remember the Hudson family, and also Bill Gray. He was, the three of them and a few more got together and rebuilt it because they realised the importance of it. It is an authentic Georgian bathhouse. And the whole lot, not just the bathhouse, was sold for 1,320 guineas, the whole of the Jubilee Gardens area. Then we come to the third day, which was the land around the town. Now, if you look at a map of the land around town, the town was a very tiny little bit here, and all the rest of the manor was agricultural land, mostly arable or meadow or pasture, but there was a few woods and a few orchards. The first lots of the sale were in this area here, to the northwest. Most of the lots were fairly small, with only 3 lots large. But we'll only have a look at 3 of these. Lot 94, Lot 97, and Lot 110. Now 94 was what we now know as Raby Park. It was also, it had a small poorhouse on the land. And that was sold for 1,400 guineas. 97 is interesting. This is Spofford Hill and Linton Road. So it's that piece on the corner there. And by 1863, there was the workhouse, the new workhouse, the infirmary, the station next door, and the railway line going around the back. So in 40 years it had changed quite dramatically. It was only £1,160 guineas at that time, but the person who bought it obviously made a lot of money on that, selling it to various people. And 110 was interesting in that it says there's a valuable stone quarry on the lot, which is here and here. And that's where all the stone to build the town came from. It's magnesium limestone, and it's quite hard version of limestone. That was sold for 1,160 guineas. And the lots to the south ended the third day. And I put the whole of this last page in here, because it is a beautiful situation for the erection of a villa, which is this one here. And then there's two smaller lots, but we won't look at those. Look at that one there. And that ended the third day. And that one lot, because it was a beautiful situation for a villa, sold for 5,520 guineas. The fourth and last day of the sale was to the east, and we looked at some 3-star lots, 136, 142, and 135. The first lot, 136, was purely agricultural land, bordering on the river down here, but very good agricultural land. And that was sold for 5,620 guineas. Obviously a very profitable area. Then 142, what we now know as the racecourse. And I didn't realise that the hill had a name. And it wasn't until I was doing this that I found the name was Clenster Hill. I've never heard that name before or since. It's the one that the grandstand actually built on. It was another large parcel of agricultural land, but it did have buildings on it, and that was sold for 8,610 guineas. Prices are going up, aren't they? Then we look at 135, which is basically all the land to the north. And also, it was the line, if you read that there, the proposed trunk road to York, and across the bottom of it. And interestingly, if you want to know where the old York Road went, it came out of Wetherby up to where we now know as the Aldi roundabout, and then off to Bickerton. Now, if you look at the shape of that junction, and you look at this picture of the junction in 1950, this was just agricultural land. There was these three houses here, and the early Sandbeck garage behind. Why was that never squared off? We have so much trouble with that roundabout now. It could have been altered quite easily right back then, but of course can't now, so we've got the problem. And it's back to the 135. Good agricultural land, there was a hall, there was houses, there was barns, orchards and woodland, and 360 acres. This is only half the list here that I've managed to get on there. How much would that go for, do you reckon? 16,280 guineas, enormous amount of money by those standards. And then the very last lot was the manor. Now the manor was the only piece of structure that you got in this was the shambles. But of course you got anybody that was fined in the courts, the money came to you. Anything that was the pickings of the market, the hiring out of the market stalls, the money came to you. It did then. I mean, it wasn't long after this that it all changed, of course. The rents and profits of the 10 shambles which rented at 3 guineas a year. And then the ones that really amuse me is if you went to walk to the Calvinist chapel and also the passageway from Mr. Grafton's garden, in other words, walkways were owned by the manor in this area. And so you got a little rake off from Mr. Grafton and also from the Calvinist chapel. And also an acknowledgement for the encroachment made by Mr. Wilton, who had built a wall on a piece that had been owned by the manor. And surprisingly, that went for quite a lot of money, 5,010 guineas. So how much did the Duke make out of it after all was said? He made 198,476 guineas, which in pounds, shillings and pence, because a guinea, £1, 1 shilling for those who don't know, 208,400. Now that was 200 years ago. So what would it be worth today? There is on the web, if you go onto the Bank of England, you can put in a date and an amount, and it'll tell you how much it's worth today. What would it be worth today? Just under 23 million. So he could well pay his gambling debts and do his building down at Chatsworth. And that ended the sale. So to sum up, in 4 days, Wetherby changed from a town of tenants to a town of landowners. That is the end. While I still have you, before I ask for any questions you might have, the sale documents have been reprinted, the exact sale documents, and they are for sale downstairs. I believe £5 each. But they're very well worthwhile. Also, if you want to see an original, I have one here. This is the an original document, 200-year-old document. So if you want to have a look at that, please do. And does anybody have any questions?
Was it quite unique?
Understood in the sale of Wetherby, everything was sold out from one property.
Yes. Yes, but we don't know which it was. We can't find out which it was. It was one house. It says on the front of the document. Yes, it's the sale of the town of Wetherby, with the exception of one house.
Was it a unique situation, Wetherby being sold?
Sorry?
Was it a unique nationally? Had other towns' estates been sold like this way?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think it was when people went bankrupt or they wanted some more money, they sold what property they had, much as the same as people do.
Yeah.
It's just that the Duke of Devonshire had quite a lot of property. It was only, by comparison, a fairly small manor.
How did the tenants raise money to buy their properties if they wanted to continue living there?
Well, that's by getting mortgages. And apparently, quite a lot of them did buy their own properties. And I think it says in about 40% of people bought their own properties. But apparently the year after there was an awful lot of people who went bankrupt. Because they wanted to buy their own property. And they would go downstairs, have a look at the exhibition downstairs, and also I think there's a walk starting in just over in about 10 minutes.